This is an unplanned video, so I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief. I'm aiming for 10 minutes. But essentially, Mashima confirmed through a Twitter space a little bit of foreshadowing of this arc. Pretty much what had happened is somebody made, like, it's more of like a funny comment. Like there's one that like there was made about when people were talking about like asking about Ankh Saram, and I think from what Mishima was kind of like sitting at with the character was initially was going to leave it more to world lore, but because a lot of people are asking about it and because of the way that he works as a writer, he probably got his ideas going about the ideas of the character and seems to be considering writing a story about that. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'll save that for another video. But somebody asked him about whether or not they would see the Jigglebutt gang again, which if you aren't unaware of it, maybe you're a manga only person, you've only read Fairy Tail and you haven't read Rave Master or you haven't watched the Fairy Tail anime, they're a comic relief gag group that are from Rave Master that made a cameo over into Fairy Tail in the anime, and they're just like a really goofy group. They're just like three clowns who are trying to be thieves, but really they don't accomplish anything. They're just these dudes with these big asses that just kind of, again, be clowns. And Mishima talks about how like he thinks they're funny, but this next arc is going to be a lot more serious, so he doesn't think he can put them in there. Why that's important is because usually Mishima, he's one that is fully hyped about doing any form of comedy whenever like the time is appropriate for it. Like there's relatively every single group he has, there's at least a single character in it that's goofy. You can look at people like Kane Hikaru, Franmoth, Jacob, Mad Mole, Haku. And Haku and Mad Mole are really in the same guild, but obviously two different squads within the guild. But Mishima will relatively always have at least one character who's goofier than the other one. It's just for fun, just to have one in there that's going to have more of just those comedic vibes. But at the same time, again, he knows when to have the characters present and when to set the tone. I know in the anime, sometimes it'll have a little bit more comedic scenes when the tone should be more serious, but that's more of the anime and stuff that they add. But this is actually really key because there's been a lot to 100 Years Quest that's had nods to different arcs going back in the original series, but taking like something and putting it a different direction or having like a nod to an earlier thing, kind of like with Mercphobia having the eye tattoo. And it's something that really he doesn't need to have at all. It's just in his human design that he decides to have, but that plus his backstory, it's a nice nod with Jalal and why Natsu having this whole thing of not wanting to fight him, but once he was just kind of out of control and just on a rampage, it went against like a conflict about like Natsu's beliefs on redemption and characters who want to do better for themselves versus obviously protecting his friends and keeping innocent lives protected against people who obviously just wanted to do them harm. And now we have this whole bit with, okay, well, where does this really leave us when it comes to 100 Years Quest and the current arc? Ignia already has a lot of tone and vibes, and similar to Acnologia in terms of threat and looming force, but when it comes to backstory and connection to the main character, it's more so like Xerath. But with him having a dark guild, it has very Tartaros vibes, and there's some nice little bits in this chapter. I made a tweet about it earlier where you can kind of see the parallels visually of what it's like when we see Mardgeir. Mardgeir is sitting in his throne, again, a throne. He's a crownless person. He's not a king or anything, but he has a throne in his castle. And he's just sitting there with like the whole head tilt, hand on his chin, kind of just looking smug. And he's talking to, in Mardgeir's case, it's Kyoka, and in Ignia's case, it's Eni and Luso. So you have this guy in a similar position talking to one woman versus two women and going over their plans and everything. And obviously that's only going to be so much, but in a whole setup of a dark guild, Mishima clearly looking at it and telling us that it's going to be a much more serious and probably aggressive arc. I just have a feeling that we're going to be seeing something more in line of something with Tartaros, and something that is going to be setting the stage for a much more severe and crazy end game. So we do know that 100 Years Quest is past the halfway point, and Mishima told us around the Gold Owl era. So my belief is we'll probably have around like 250, something like that, for the chapter mark. So in my mind, I'm always thinking around 3 arcs or so from that. Mishima decides to change his mind and add some little more, shorten a little bit from that. But I would imagine, based off of like how he writes, that everything beforehand, especially with stuff like with Celine, Dogermag, and Viernes, it was to set this up, because he loves to do arcs where they have their own thing, but they have ties that eventually, plot lines spread out and then eventually weave back into a big arc where all of these subplots can join into something bigger. You can look at everything leading up to Sirius Island, or obviously in Tartaros, or in Alvarez, like all these things where it's gonna have little bits. What's my dog doing? Ready, come here. We're talking right now about Tartaros. Oh, he's got a toy. He's fine. Hi, bud. I thought he was chewing on something he's not supposed to. Ready, say hi. You want to say hi real fast? Come here. We're talking about Tartaros. We're talking about Fire and Flames. We got some hype going in here ready, so we need you to calm down. Okay, get down. Get down, bud. Anyway, we have a spot right now where Ignia is really setting the stage. We already have a lot of his backstory, information, and ties. We're just missing bits in between each of those to make as much sense to fully understand his character. On top of that, we already have where we're going. We have the headquarters of their group. We know a little bit about their plans. See, he got in the video. Now he really wants to keep being in the video. But just sit here. And we also have a little bit about their plans. Like I said, you have like we're gonna transmute history, and Brian saying specifically, your past has disappeared. Not saying like, oh yeah, the town has turned to ash, or we teleported you. It's a very weird way of his speech that I imagine is going to play a little bit into what exactly their plans are and to what we're going to be in store for up and coming. The only thing about Fire and Flames for me when it comes to how much we're going to be seeing right away is how big Mishima plans to make them in terms of quantity. I imagine we're going to get a decent amount. Like, I don't think it's going to be like the Racion Sace where there's only a few of them, just based off the fact they have this massive castle. And I really like I want it to kind of be how like the Oceans were, for example, in Eden Zero, where we have like the B squads. And that's something I wish Mishima played more onto, is I like having these characters who are in their guild but are weaker, and they're like the ones that are going to be like, yeah, you're going to have them for like a chapter, maybe 2 chapters of a fight, and they're going to be a little tricky, but they're not going to be huge deals for the main cast of people to fight. But then also we can kind of cycle in other characters besides just the main dudes. Like, you could bring in some people from Diablos. You can bring in Stinger Rogue. I know Guild Arts is somebody we're waiting to have show up and be present, and it's stuff like that that I would love to see, where we just have characters who it's like, yeah, this guy's only going to be in the manga for like a chapter or so. Maybe he'll make a cameo again later, but for the most part, they're not going to be a big role character. But it helps build a visual of their guild. It helps do some world building specifically for this group, and it gives us a good, strong reason to kind of see them as a group and not just like a squad with a name. Because that's going to be the thing with them versus, say, something like Tartaros, where Tartaros was mostly just almost the 7 Kin of Purgatory, the 9 demon gates. And I don't want that to be the case for this. I really like the idea of there being more spread members and units, and giving us more time to see a larger group. Because just based off of the fact that they're supposed to be having, all fire mages and wizards for some form of plan, it would make sense they wouldn't just have, really OP people. They're going to have anybody that they see valuable for the scheme. So I'm get every single day and every single time we get information on Ignia and the current arc, it just seems more and more hype. We're in the year of the dragon. We have this dude who is like the antagonist version of Natsu, something again that I've been waiting for pretty much the whole story. I still remember it's like we had Gagil ends up switching sides, and then he's just never evil, but it's like he had the pathway potential to become that adversary for the main character. Then we had Cobra kind of was, but not really. We had Zankro, but then Zankro got killed. And you know, we had Jackal, but then Jackal ended up being more of like an antagonist for Lucy development. You know, we had Agil. Agil was kind of more like Cobra in that regard. Scullion, but then Scullion seemed to kind of shift over to Gray, and then obviously we have Diablos as an ally now. But Ignia is the one that really presents himself as this big master nemesis to Natsu, and that's more and more so every single time we get to him. And every single time we have information on his character and events around his character fleshed out in the story. So, like I said, I'm ready for it. If we're gonna get a Tartaros 2 where we have just serious moment after serious moment, and I'm hoping it's something like that in like Sirius Island, where every single time something goes good for the main cast members, very shortly after it's flipped against them. There's, you know, some other big conflict that now is present, and they don't get a moment to breathe, because it's during those times where there is seemingly no chill, and you just know that like every single time that you get a moment to kind of relax, you know something else is about to pop out and become a problem. And that's what keeps the arc on its toes, and it keeps a lot of the tension going and a lot of the problems just rolling in and making it so it's harder for them to really, you know, catch their breath, try and get a proper footing and to keep going. That's one thing that Alvarez did really well on. I feel like with Alvarez, we just didn't have as much of the big terror, like big looming terror that like Sirius Island and Tartaros had, but it wasn't supposed to be that type of arc, so it's not really going to be that style. But I believe, at least so far, with like, especially with how Mashima's describing it and how Ignia's character has been presented, that we're going to be having an arc again more like that, where we're just going to have this constant avalanche of issues and problems and dilemmas constantly rolling downhill at the main cast, and they're just trying to figure out how exactly they can deal with it. Because that's another way that would be great to bring in other characters, maybe bring in again Jalal, you know, Sting and Rogue again, Gildart, Slaxus, Gajil, relatively anybody that you can then at that point have a reason to bring them into the story, especially if we're going to have way more members of Fire and Flame than, say, again with what we had with Goldal, or what we had with Diablos at the time, or, you know, the God Seeds, because we only have, you know, the primary members of the story right now, and they're mostly separated. We don't know where Wendy, Gray, and Lucy have moved to. We don't know if they're teleported, if Hologram had to pop up and save them from some form of weird Hax fire death. Urza's, you know, still at the docks saying bye to Jalal, and Natsu's just by himself. So even with that, it's like, what, you have five fighters, and right now Fire and Flame already has 4 people, but one of those guys is Ignia, so it's like you can't fully count them, but if you do, it's like the main cast altogether still is not enough. So we'll see exactly how obviously all this plays out. I mean, we just got the newest chapter, yesterday actually. So I mean, we've still got another like 12 and a half days to the next chapter. I imagine the next chapter is going to be more Brian fighting and finding out a little bit more about him, and maybe a little bit more about Fire and Flame. And I think that with Brian too, this is something that'll kind of end it with. I think Brian will also set a good idea of what we're going to be dealing with. Because say if he's really weak in the guild, if he's defeated and he's not a big deal in the guild at all, but he's already this much of a menace, or if he's not defeated and we have him as a villain for later, I think that'll, you know, those are 2 options that will really kind of let us know that this is an arc where, like, we're not just going to be having, you know, one-off guys constantly in. I think characters like that are important, because, you know, you can have a guy come in, he fights for 1 chapter, he's out of the way, again, you might see him later, but it builds the idea and the vision more that you're dealing with a guild. This isn't just like a bandit group. It's got 5 guys, and, you know, only 2 of them are really strong. Fire and Flame should be a very formidable group, and on top of that, they should be relatively of size, just given, you know, obviously Ignia's ambitions and whatnot, and the fact that they're this well known. It's not like Erasion Sace, where we're only just going to have a handful of them, and it's something that obviously we're going to have to wait and see kind of playing out. But I have a feeling in the next, like, over probably in like next like 3 or so chapters, we're gonna really understand what we're dealing with this. Anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts are about this so far. I know I wanted 10 minutes, I'm at 15 minutes, but I am very excited for this because this is one of those things that Mishima didn't directly tell us, but just by the way that he responded to it, I could tell, at least from his side of things, that he's probably got a lot going on in preparation for this. Just because it's like, especially with Viernes too, like he clearly wanted to kind of move through Viernes and then get us to Ignia, and it's the Year of the Dragon. So I imagine there's going to be some crazy stuff going on, especially too with the narration bits at the end of the Dogra Labyrinth, and then Ignia commenting as well again on this chapter to really kind of just say, hey, don't forget about this because this is going to be relevant soon. You guys got some shit about to happen, so make sure that you remember the Dogra Labyrinth in that arc because stuff's about to get a little hectic. But anyway, like I said, before I ramble on some more, yeah, comment below and tell me what your thoughts about all this are, and what are you exactly expecting out of this arc? I know there's going to be some people that are going to be serious and tell me stuff. There's going to be some people who be like, yeah, Ignia's going to lose in one chapter. Just tell me what your thoughts are, though. I mostly just want to know what you guys have to really say. Do you think this could be another Tartaros-like arc in the making? I think it would be really cool for that because, actually, one more thing I'll add is when Mishima wrote Tartaros, he planned for Fairy Tail to end with Alvarez, but once he got to Alvarez, he already planned 100 Years Quest out and that planned that he was going to do a continuation. So at the time of Alvarez, and while he was writing it and releasing it, it wasn't supposed to be a final-esque arc. It's supposed to be a big, grand arc, obviously, of large-scale, powerful character proportions, but it wasn't supposed to be like the Hail Mary, all-in, end-of-times battle war of the series. So I think that's why Alvarez doesn't have that like looming end times feel. Obviously, once Zack and Lola get this space between time, it had more of that tone, but that could be this arc, and it's going to have more of that looming doom that people thought we were going to have with Alvarez, and we had at the times of Sirius Island and with Tartaros. Now, fingers crossed on it, because Ignia, again, Ignia has the raw power of somebody like Acnologia, but he seems to have the ambitions and schemes of someone more like Zareth, while going through unconventional means like somebody like Mark Gear. So we'll see how this all plays out. Anyway, comment below, and I'll talk to you guys later.